food policy. Right. Okay, good. Better late than never. Thanks, Gloria. So the first speaker, Dr. Mads Fischer-Muller, Professor of Food Policy at Scotland's Rural College and leader of the SRUC's upcoming Future Food Systems Research Centre. He's also one of the authors of Nordic Bioeconomy, 25 Cases for Sustainable Change, which is a very forward-looking document done by the commissioned by the Nordic governments for a bioeconomy, and Mads was one of the authors of that. So over to you, Mads.
Thank you very much, and I've been looking very much forward to this event. I'll just give a bit of context for why I believe that this event is very, very important and why we need to talk about the future of food and how we can reimagine current land use in Scotland. So the core of the food system in Scotland and in most places around the world, the core thinking have been the same since, you could say, the end of the Second World War. We have a green revolution that had to take care of the fact that we had increasing population growth, and we just needed to make sure that food production kept pace with or outpaced that increasing populations growth. And we've succeeded. We've had more and more food produced every year, and we now have around 3,000 calories available per human being. So there's no lack of food on our planet at the moment. We need food as humans, but our food needs our land. We need, at the moment, the way we currently farm is that we need a lot of land to produce the food we're producing at the moment. And the problem is the way we currently produce food and the way our food habits are working is that the food we produce is taking up too much of our land. That's why food is so incredibly important for an organization like SEDA Land. The problem is at the moment, food is actually, if we're looking at mammals, for instance, humans and our animals make up 97% of all mammals. So whenever we see David Attenborough's lovely movie, cinematics panning out over the wildlife, that's just only 3% of what's out there, and 97% are either humans or the things we eat. So we are just putting this huge pressure on the planet just from the way we want to eat. And similar, we know with climate change that food is approaching being the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So we need to figure out a way to produce food without emitting so much greenhouse gas as we do at the moment. So that's a core problem one of the current green revolution food system. Takes up too much land, causes too much environmental damage. Number two is our food habits are horrible. Around the globe, we have increasingly turning towards you could say a Western diet that's not good for our bodies. Here in these shores, it has already for the past 15 years been the norm that people are overweight. But actually we are approaching a time where we have more obese people than normal weight people. We are gone from in the 80s being normal weight as a population to about now being more obese than any other country in Europe. So we're definitely caught by the junk food cycle in some vicious loop that just keeps us eating more and more unhealthy. And it's not because we want to, it's because the system dictates us and pushes us in that direction. We've also lost our connection with with food production. So we might be here in this room thinking about, oh, well, I will go and have a lovely hummus, or I'll go and cook a steak with some lovely seasonal vegetables afterwards. But only 18% of all meals in Scotland are actually cooked from scratch, which leaves that more than 80% are either just takeaway or ready to eat or pre-cooked that just needs to be heated. So we are also in a deficit of food culture. And at the same time as we have this obesity and lack of food culture, we know that even though we are producing enough food, we're not distributing that food well enough. So here in the UK alone, 10% of UK households are food insecure, have a hard time putting food on their plates. 2 million UK residents are reliant on food banks and charities just to get by food-wise. So we have this great inequality in our food system, and it gets even bigger when we come to a global scale, where the World Food Program boss earlier this month or last month said, well, we have to take food from the hungry to feed the starving. That's how bad the situation is. And then I think the war in Ukraine have taught us one thing. The third point is how we have had a food system that have put us in a place where we've been very, very reliant on a global food system working smoothly. And once we have a disruption, as we've seen with the war in Ukraine and the kind of disruptions we will increasingly see from climate change, we'll see that we don't have enough resilience in our food system. It isn't well equipped to take shocks and absorb shocks. So whenever we have we saw, for instance, just the fact that one ship got stuck in the Suez Canal for a couple of days earlier this year, and that suddenly caused global food prices to soar and farmers going in panic. It is a little bit crazy that we have a global system that's so interdependent that any little tiny friction in the system can cause havoc for a lot of people who are reliant on it. So we need to rethink it, both because it's not good for the planet, it's not good for our health, and it's too prone to shocks. The good thing is we have growing global consensus that something needs to be done. We need to rethink this green revolution thinking where more is better. We need to rethink. And the core point about this is we need a protein shift. We need to think about our obsession with meat. Meat is just such an inefficient way of converting what the planet offers us into food. So we need to rethink, especially the Western diet and our reliance on meat as we know it. We need a just transition that allows everyone in the food system to have a role also in a new system that's better both for health and planet. So it's not the farmer's fault. It's not anyone's fault that we've ended up where we are, but we all need to figure out how can we transition to something that's both more healthy, more sustainable, and more resilient. And we need to have a more diverse system. That might be the core takeaway from the global discussion that we will bring down and put into tangible ideas here. It needs to be much, much more diverse, because if we have a more diverse system, we are less prone to any shock in any given part of the system causing havoc all over the place. So we need to increase diversity. At the moment, as Gail said, we are spending upwards of 80% of our good arable lands just for feed, and then another 10% for growing barley for whiskey. And that might be economically great, but when we are then hit by a shock like we've seen with the war in Ukraine and prices soaring on wheat and prices soaring on fertilizer, we are in big trouble with this system. And we don't have it. We can't just change what we have been sowing this year to accommodate the big shock we've seen. So we need to be much more diverse in the way we farm. As Gail said, the policies seem a bit insufficient at the moment, both the policies coming out of Hollywood and definitely the policies coming out of London. But I have been working in governments, and I can see that things like the things we do today, showing that change is possible, is also what inspires policymakers to be more bold, to take action. So I believe that after today's events, we can hopefully go out with our backs straight and say, change is possible. We actually have a lot of paths here in Scotland that we can take forward and be part of the new food system.
Thank you, Mads. Sorry if I cut you short there, but I'm going to be tough with speakers in the first half so we can get onto the Q&A. Gloria, can we have the result of the poll up? Which, as I say, this one wasn't actually a poll, but I guess most of you would realise it was under 10%, but it's a lot worse than that. It's actually 1% or possibly a little over 1%, but it is staggeringly low. So it's just to reinforce to you the problem that we have, that we're facing, and how much we need to make better. So now we've got our first artistic interlude, and this is Chris Poichi, and some of you will have heard him read previously at our conversations. Chris is a poet that explores the way human life and wildlife interact, and his latest collection of poems, Look, Breathe, has been published by Red Squirrel Press. I hope you'll all be running out to read it after hearing Chris read his poem, and I'll let him introduce that himself. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Gail. As just a humble poet amongst all these very knowledgeable people, I'm again impressed by just how deep the knowledge runs here and the seriousness of intent that's on show. I fear all that is about to change with this poem, though. And I also would like to apologise for the lack of cabbages in the background. I was very pleased with Matt's very green background here. Anyway, this is my poem. It's kind of research-based, very kind of. Things in it that you may not be familiar with, though I'm sure you are either current or possible. Anyway, this is the poem. Let them eat oatcake, a future food fantasia for Scotland. Let them eat the world beneath their feet, pignut and parsnip, carrot and neep. Let them snuffle for truffles in Forfar and dig chanterelles in Chetanra and bow to the bluet, morel and chicken of the woods. And let them raise their heads to the miracle of vertical lettuce in a circular economy, shining from their high, wet rows above the recycled basketball court floor in a converted plastics factory just outside Cumbernauld. Let them wake herbs from their hugel culture beds and rouse the sleeping radish, the lazy kale. Let them swallow a spitting Sunday roast from the virtual fence app-controlled oxen and boar, stag and ram who roam the shimmering Greta Thunberg oak woods northeast of Falkirk and formerly known as Ineos Grangemouth. And on high days and holidays, let them gobble a quarter-pound grasshopper and mealworm burger, dripping with Hebridean hydroponic tomato ketchup or chickpea brine mayonnaise, or both. And let them smell the sweet smell of seaweed and ozone as they munch a fillet of one of the millions of lice-free wild salmon teeming at the mouths of the Forth and Tay, Dee and Spey, and who give themselves happily to the waiting, reusable hemp-woven nets before being deep-fried in oatmeal stout and cricket flour batter. But make them eat their greens, spinach and cabbage, or Swiss chard if they live in Bear's Den or Morningside, as well as their Blaeberry blues and cloudberry yellows and the deeply passionate reds of Strathmiglo strawberries raised in rainvis and polytunnels wrought from melted down lateral flow tests. And give them this day their daily wheat and rye grain Zentrafan milled bread, smeared with runny Shetland honey, now that bees are abundant again. And let them give thanks to the bee, the beautiful, generous, necessary bee. Let them chew seps, bite bramble, pluck plums, crunch crab, and for old time's sake, let them eat oatcake. Let them, so they can taste the past, crumble sweetly on the tongue as they down a dram of 300-year-old Islay malt or pea-flavoured climate-positive gin. And when their day is done, let them walk hand in hand down Vennel and Loning, Bray and Glen, and drink their fill of starlight over the Clyde and moonlight over the Minch, every last drop, for ever and ever. Amen. Poem is over.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm grinning from ear to ear Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm afraid I'm probably one of the chard eaters, I say it. So if any of you need light relief in the sort of misery in the years to come of how we deal with our food system, just come back to our recording of Chris reading his poem and it will cheer you up. Right, so the next speaker. I'm still seeing Chris. Is everything all right? Am I being heard?
Yes, I am.
No, that's all right. Okay, now I just wanted to make sure, I'm so technology puts the fear of God into me. So I'm just relieved I'm being heard. So the next speaker, first of all, I must say thank you to the Open University Scotland for sponsoring that. So thank you to them. Yes, now I'm swinging from Mads talking about the big global picture, and I'm going now right to the other end of the spectrum to Rupert Waits, director of Buck and Birch, who is a passionate forager, and he's a great advocate of knowing your local landscape by foraging and understanding the sense of place and belonging that gives you. And so I'm hoping that he's going to take this down to the micro level and explain to you the importance of that relationship with the earth. So over to you, Rupert.
Thank you very much, Gail, and great to be here. I am Rupert Waits, one half of the Buck and Birch. We describe ourselves as a wild flavour innovation company, I guess. Focusing mostly these days on the alcohol business. We have our own range of wild-inspired drinks, but by no means is that the only thing we've ever done. We started out life 10 years ago as a wild food pop-up. I think for me, it began long before. And I don't know if we have the slides there, but slide one for me was this tatty old book, as my mother puts it, Food for Free by Richard Mabey. I read this as a young lad growing up in the Highlands, and it really changed my life, I guess. And we were talking here about reimagining food. And for me, this book, it just made me think that food was somehow magical. It was all around. It was there for all of us to reach out and touch if we knew what we were doing, And I suggest to anybody they buy a copy of this book. It's beautifully written. It's inspirational, and it's a great starting point for a voyage into the landscape. As a 12-year-old, I didn't really know what to do with these ideas. I didn't really know how to get into things. But forward 20 years, the idea and the inspiration of that book stayed with me. I found myself in Thailand, very tired after a career in chefing. I had a young family. I had time as well, and the thing that came back to me was this echo of the wilderness. It's my parents instilled it in us as kids. We were always immersed in it. I'd never really felt at home in Scotland for some bizarre reason. The 2008 crash made we had to come back. And I promised myself that if I did come back, I would go on this voyage. I would seek out the tasty stuff and get right back to that macro level. I was sick and tired of cooking steaks that came from Nowheresville, and I really wanted to connect through the food. And so I put my kids in a buggy. I took a nice easy job, and I set off on a little voyage of discovery. And it really was a sort of homecoming for me. And I mean, slide 2, if you have it there, is what we call the wall of weird. This is a very stylized version. It's a tiny little snapshot of some of the things, the hundreds of things over the years that we've collected at the Buck and Birch. And there's pollen in there and flowers and just 100 memories as well for me personally. This we have now in our tasting room. And this is the sort of thing that inspired my business partner to get on the phone back in 2011 and trying to get me out of my retirement and back in the kitchen. And he said, let's cook dinner and let's put some of this stuff on show. And I kind of reluctantly agreed. I dusted off my apron. We cooked dinner in Portobello one night for 12 people. I thought I'd get a few quid out of it, but realistically, it was the start of something quite big. I think we knew that straight away. A few years later, we were kind of bored of not having any money. It was never about money, but we really wanted the idea to be sustainable, that this conversation we were having with the landscape and sharing it with people, it was really powerful. So to sustain it, we thought it has to become a business. And it was never our intention to own a restaurant or run a restaurant. I think we wanted that side of things to be purely creative. But the third slide, if you've got it there, is kind of where we're at today. This product, Birch, is a sort of culmination of what we want to do. It's answering some of those questions about land ownership and community and why we eat what we eat and identity and things. And it's just very simply birch in a bottle. It's a spirit. We make it in conjunction with Gifford Community Woodland. It really enhances their experience of the woodland, and I think sets up a model for us to inspire people to see their landscape in a different way and to fall in love with their landscape. And I think there's a Scottish word called hefting, and people used to be hefted to the land, meaning they were part of it. And I think that's what's missing. So we see our role as being one to help people to connect back to the landscape, to fall in love with it, and then to become nurturers of it, instead of there's an awful lot of guilt and fear and all these kind of things floating about, and we're kind of optimists. We want to say, look, we've got this, and I think the birch tree, it's a perfect place to start. It's a tree of rebirth, renewal, regeneration, and it's all about, for us, getting those people, plants, and place back together in ways that are really meaningful, and hopefully make the world a better place. So I'm excited. I can't wait to hear what everyone else has got to say, and I'll see you all in the Q&A.
Whoops. Thank you, Rupert. And I went on a birch tapping trip with Rupert in the community in Gifford Community Woodland, and what was incredible is everything that grows, Rupert was, I can make that with that, I can make that with that. He makes syrup from some things, he makes flour from other things. I mean, it's just like an apothecary, as you can see behind him. There's not anything that grows that Rupert can't turn into something. So thank you. So next we have, and again, I'm swinging back, I'm alternating deliberately between the more traditional food systems and the more high tech. And so now we're going to the high tech with Graham Warren, who's co-founder and director of Vertigrow, who are going to open the first vertical farm in Scotland this summer. And look forward to hearing more about that. Over to you, Graham.
Thanks, Gail. Great to speak here and to be alongside some really interesting businesses and really interesting people, and looking forward to being part of the conversation later on. Gloria, if you could move on to the next slide. I'll just give a brief overview of what we're doing and some background to vertical farming, which most of you will have heard of or hopefully have a basic knowledge of. But this is an area that we started looking at as a company around 4 years ago. This came out of our existing arable farm in Aberdeenshire, and we're looking at the future of farming in Scotland, the future of food production, how we could produce more food locally, sustainably, and within Scotland, and do that to a really high standard. So really good quality produce that provided all of the nutrients and vitamins that we need. So how can we really push on that quality, excellent flavour of produce in a better way than we are just now? So that was our discussion three or 4 years ago. And part of that was prompted by some of the stats that are in front of you there, and that Mads has a really good knowledge of as well and discussed earlier on. I mean, there's some really surprising statistics around food consumption in the UK. Like the fact that only around half of what we eat in the UK is actually produced here, which I think is quite a worrying figure. That so much of what we consume has to be imported from abroad, and that, as was touched on earlier, works fine when when supply chains work well. We have this just-in-time supply chain setup where when it's working efficiently, then it's absolutely perfect and there's no issues. But one tiny breakdown in that supply chain, and then suddenly we've got real problems with where our food comes from, and then that has knock-on effects on price and so on. So there's some interesting stats in there, and there's a quote at the bottom I put on there that says air freighted with freshness. This used to be, I've seen this less often recently, but this used to be something that you would actually see as a selling point on supermarket fresh fruit, veg, herbs and so on. But they were shouting about the fact that they'd really gone the extra mile to fly it halfway around the world to get to your plate as quickly as possible and as freshly as possible. Interestingly, some of that messaging has now disappeared as supermarkets, retailers and so on have started to realise that actually there's a bit of scrutiny in where their food comes from and how it gets to our plate. But those foods that were previously branded as air freighted with freshness, they are still air freighted with freshness, but they're not shouting about it now. If you look at where a lot of your food comes from, it will still be flown in from Kenya, from Ethiopia, from Israel and so on. And if it has a short shelf life, you can probably assume that it's been flown here. It's not been on a ship either. So there's a huge climate impact associated with that as well. So if we move on to the next slide, that was our kind of thinking. We're looking at some of those challenges, and for us, vertical farming is part of the answer. It's interesting being alongside some of our speakers because I think it has a role to play alongside some of the other farming systems and so on that we're going to talk about later, in providing some more of our food locally. So there are some benefits of vertical farming system that I'll run through, and I'll give you first of all actually what it means for those who haven't come across it before. So vertical farming, or CEA, which is controlled environment agriculture, essentially covers a kind of range of systems where it's grown in generally a slightly more high-tech way than traditional field-grown produce or polytunnels or greenhouses, generally with crops sort of stacked on top of each other for efficiency of space, normally with LED lights or similar lighting. And generally the environment is controlled in such a way that it's very consistent. So in our system, for example, we're working with a Scottish producer of some of the kit. That means that it's consistent all year round. We've got it inside a building where the temperature is controlled. It's exactly the same in January as it would be in July. And therefore we can grow exactly the same produce to exactly the same standards in winter as we can in summer. And we think that there's some great benefits around that. So the system, most of the systems will work on a hydroponic basis or an ebb and flow basis, where water is poured into the tray on a sort of automated system normally, and then floods back out. So the crop will pick up what it needs, and what it doesn't need, in our case, goes back to a holding tank. If you design a system well and think about all the aspects that I've listed there, you can make it fairly sustainable. You can, for example, we have no pesticides whatsoever in our system because it's an enclosed environment, and we've designed our facilities so that we can't have bugs and so on in it. Just using positive air pressure is all we need to make sure that that's the case. We don't have any pesticides at all. Fertilizer use can be minimized. So rather than spraying it in a large area and very little of that is picked up by plants, it's targeted into the nutrients. And as I said, floods through the system, plants pick up what they need. And if it's not picked up, it goes back to holding tank and goes through in the next cycle. So there's benefits there as well. By growing more locally as well, we think there's benefits in terms of food waste. If we harvest things in the morning, that can be in our customers with our consumers in the afternoon. So it's as fresh as possible. And when you've got crops which have a relatively short shelf life, we think there's some great benefits there, and that means that there's less food going to waste, which is critical as well. At the moment, most of these systems will be growing things like leafy greens, herbs, microherbs. We're growing lots of things like basil, mints, coriander, and all to a really high standard. And over time, what can be grown in these facilities will expand. There's already, we've done some really interesting things with fruiting varieties, chilies, strawberries, and so on. I mean, essentially, if you're prepared to put the time into research, you could grow virtually anything in that system. Obviously, there are challenges. We're not going to avoid that. There's an energy consumption, potentially a problem for the industry, depending where that energy comes from. In our mind, though, that is addressable. For our system, for example, we don't burn any fossil fuels for heating the system. The heat we need just comes from the lights. Actually, there's enough excess heat, and by insulating the system, we don't need any extra heat into there. So we only use electricity in our system, and one of the good things about electricity is it's one of the best energy inputs to green. Already in Scotland, the energy system, or the electricity system, is very green, and obviously then we've got an abundance of turbines, and that can be expanded further to cover the industry. But that's something that needs to be borne in mind, and we need to make sure we're doing that responsibly. So overall, looking at all those benefits, and as long as you're mindful of the need to make sure that you're developing these sites responsibly in the right place, there are benefits to the Scottish economy and to how we get food in Scotland. We can create more rural jobs in Scotland, replacing products that would otherwise be flown in from abroad. And we think that if we can use land really efficiently here, then that can free up land for other uses. So in this most vertical farms, and in our case, we have a tower which is 9 meters tall, 9 or 10 meters tall. So we're growing a lot of food densely in a very small area, but that means that a lot of more marginal ground round about can be freed up for alternative uses. In our case, for example, we're looking at more tree planting on farm in more marginal fields, and then there's benefits for the remaining land which isn't used. These facilities could also be built in brownfield sites. They could be built close to sources of demand. So you could have them in central belt areas where most of the population in Scotland is, for example. So if we take a step back and look at how and where we grow food, if we look at the whole system, I think there's definitely some benefits. And it's a really exciting opportunity if we join all of these dots together. So hopefully that gives a bit of an introduction, and we can pick up on some of the detail in the chat later on.
Thank you, Graham. That's great. I think what really excites me about vertical farms, what Graham's doing, is that it can be rolled out on a small scale, as Graham says, and it can be rolled out anywhere, on any site. So it really is something for communities to embrace, rural communities that cut off, especially if they can tap into the local renewable energy source. There's a lot spoken last week about energy and how the north of Scotland, it potentially is going to have a lot of excess energy that we should be tapping into. So vertical farms galore in the north of Scotland, please. And just by the way, last week we had Douglas Mackenzie from Xanthella as one of the speakers, and he makes the lighting systems that people like Graham use in their vertical farms. So next speaker, so swinging back the pendulum, we're now going back to the more traditional type farming, and this is Nikki Yoxall from Grampian Grazers, who will tell us about her farm in Aberdeenshire.
Thanks, Gail. And I'm going to go a little bit broader than just what we do on our farm, and just give you some slightly different ways possibly of thinking about how livestock fit into our system. So when we're asked to reimagine food, we don't actually need to go all that far away from current food production approaches to find systems that are better for the environment, for people and for animals. So let us take the case of sheep and cattle, oft cited as being responsible for high greenhouse gas emissions or nature decline, particularly in the uplands. We've become used to seeing sheep spread across vast areas upland hills, or like their larger ruminant counterparts, cattle boxed into fields of fairly homogeneous grasses. If they're lucky, there may be a hedge around or some clover in the sward to offer a slightly different bite. Luckily, our cattle, as you can see here, get slightly more options. We attribute spatial norms to livestock. The east is for crops and the west and north is for the cattle and sheep. And these have been reinforced by government-funded projects that have told us to simplify our farming systems in the name of efficiency and productivity, all of which help us to feed the world. But there are alternatives to these approaches, alternatives that embrace complexity, heterogeneity, and that mimic natural processes. So let me give you two examples, neither of which are particularly new, and in fact reflect well-known historic practices that have been lost over many years in the race for simplified output. So the first is the concept of an integrated farm system. And you may think this just means mixed farming, but whilst a mixed farm might have multiple outputs, for example, where I live in Aberdeenshire, there may be beef, crops and sheep on the same farm holding, they usually occupy different areas of land on that farm and are not necessarily integrated in a way that reduces the need for external inputs. An approach often found on organic farms is the use of rotations, where each year, each field is used for a different purpose, which can help nutrient cycling, it rests the ground, and it can help address disease issues. But a further step can be taken that reflects true integration, where each field is used for multiple outputs every year. So by grazing crops early in their growth stage, farmers can reduce the need for both fungicides and synthetic fertilizers, or by following harvestable crops with cover crops that can be grazed by sheep or cattle, it is possible to add fertility to the soil and use the same field for both crops and livestock in the same year. Other alternative options are represented by multiple crops grown in the same space, either called intercropping, where they're grown in rows alongside each other, or polycropping, where they're mixed together. And this increases the plant species diversity in each field. The second example is the integration of trees and farming, known as agroforestry, and you can see here an example of silver pasture, where the cattle are grazing in areas of woodland. Using land to grow trees alongside crops or graze animals gives us multiple outputs per hectare, and mimics the natural complexity of healthy, functioning ecosystems. So trees can offer multiple ecosystem services, but they also provide harvestable top fruits and nuts, and obviously timber. Their deep roots support mycorrhizal fungal networks in the soil, and they provide shade and shelter for animals and crops, both of which will be increasingly important in a changing climate. Tree browse, so the leaves of the trees being eaten by animals, offer significant nutrient benefit, and of course branches and trunks make excellent scratching posts, which help create an environment where natural behaviours can be displayed. Where Mads highlighted earlier the inefficiency of meat, we could possibly benefit from remembering that farm animals represent so much more than the food that they provide. They are critical in cycling nutrients. Their dung, when free of chemical worming treatments, offers vital food and habitat for dung dwellers, such as dung beetles and other invertebrate larvae, which in turn are key protein sources for wild mammals and birds. Cattle play an important role in our cultural heritage. The drovers of old understood the intrinsic value of livestock beyond just meat, and the original crofting cow, the Shetlands, which is what you can see here, offers meat, milk, and even draft power. And I'm not suggesting we eschew tractors in favour of an ox and cart, but it would be helpful for us to maybe look back over our shoulder into history and take some time to consider just where did we go so wrong? How can we learn from those mistakes, and what can those learnings teach us as we rethink our food systems to become a good food nation? So when we are asked to reimagine food, we need to reimagine what our farming landscape looks like. It isn't as simple as changing what we produce and eat, but taking a step back in the system, as we've heard from others, to how we produce our food, how we value the landscapes we live in. And for many of us in the world of regenerative agriculture or agroecology, where I find myself, we often talk about the how, not the cow. And that really is the key. So we need consumers to ask questions and not just accept the marketing spiel that would have you think that all Scotch beef comes from a heathery hillside. So my ask for action today, not in a far off future, but from this moment, is that where you can, buy directly from producers, look out community supported agricultures, veg box schemes, your local baker, but ask where the grain comes from for the flour. If you eat meat, buy it direct from the farms, and like Rupert encourages us to do, reconnect with the land, with the soil. Consider how you can put your local landscape on your plate.
Yep, very nice, Nikki. Thank you very much. And obviously, eating meat is a very controversial subject. So we're going to have the next poll, please, Gloria, which I did put in the wrong place. So hopefully you got my message in the chat, if we could have poll 2. So I'm having a provocative poll deliberately after Nikki's talk, just to see what you all say to that, and see how many George Monbiot's we've got in the audience. Okay, so while you're doing that, introduce the next speaker. So again, swinging back to the high-tech end of the spectrum, and we've got Des Cave from Bioproducts, and he is a toxicologist, and also he's the business development director at Bioproducts, which is an insect genetics company. Insects being a high protein source that we can be adding to food if we eat less meat. So over to you, Des.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm going to talk about insects. Bioproducts is a company that does black soldier fly. We grow them, we actually selectively breed them so that they become better and more nutritious, etc., etc. They grow faster, they lay more eggs, and all of those kind of things. Yeah, it's definitely concentrated on insects. If we go to the first slide, or the first picture, yeah, that's what a black soldier fly is. As you can see, the fly is a fly, and it's black, and it's a soldier, hence its name, black soldier fly. But the thing you're interested in really is the one at the top, which is the larvae. The fly at the bottom is about 3 centimeters long. It won't live up here in Scotland, it's too cold, so you have to keep it in a nice warm environment. but the larvae is only about 15 millimeters long, and you can use that to feed to chickens, to salmon, to trout, to pigs. So you can just grow the larvae and just throw them into the pens, and they forage for them, and then you basically use your chickens as you would. So they lay eggs, or you use them for meat. The good thing about this black soldier fly is it eats almost anything that's organic. As Gail said in the introduction, I'm a toxicologist, have been for about 40 years. So I know a lot about poisons. I always say to my wife, I could actually poison her now. It would be untraceable, really. And I'd only need about 2 grams of those larvae, 2 grams of eggs, and they'd eat her when she was dead in about 14 days. There'd be nothing left, absolutely nothing. They eat everything. What most people do is feed them on food waste, though. And we've all heard that there's a lot of food waste. There's actually about 9.5 million tons of food waste in the UK. And if you fed that to these larvae, you'd end up with about 2.6 million tons of protein. When you compare that to the 3.2 million tons of soya that we import, it's about 65% of all the protein that we import as soya. So you get a good idea of how much we could produce, and most of that soya is used for feeding animals, whereas we could feed these to animals instead. So it goes in some way to mitigate that import of soya, and we can still all eat beef, chicken, eggs. And what most people do, and it's scalable depending on what you do, is you take food waste, and let's say a farmer, he gets his food waste from the local supermarket, he feeds it to eggs, he feeds them to the larvae, he harvests the larvae, he feeds the larvae to the chickens, his chickens lay eggs, and he sells his eggs back to the supermarket. So it's a completely circular, sustainable economy where we're actually removing the food waste, which would just normally go to landfill, and we're actually producing something that we can eat. Or you can do it for chickens so that you can make chicken pie or whatever it is you sort of want to do. So it's completely sustainable, and it goes round and round. And we're actually removing food waste as it is. But they will grow on anything else. We've heard that there's a lot of whiskey produced here in Scotland, and there's also a lot of beer. We actually grow ours on brewers' grains from 2 of the breweries in Edinburgh. And we just take the spent grain and we feed it back to those animals, and they grow quite easily on it. But you could feed them on cow manure. You could feed them on chicken manure. They still grow just as well, believe you me. They'll eat anything, like I've said already. So that's the sort of thing you could feed them on. And you can need probably a mixture of all of those. I know there's some people up north trying to feed them on seaweed, and that works as well. But it's a sort of a mid-size sort of venture then. If you want something small, then you can get what we actually sell a little starter pack, but you can get a little starter pack from us, and you can have a tray. You can put your own food waste into it, and you can grow your own, feed them to your own chickens. You can, if you go on just quickly to slide 2, if you grind these larvae up and make them into a flour, we're not going to get slide 2. You can put that flour into pizza dough, into bread, into pasta, and then we can eat it as well. You don't have to eat insects. You can put the flour into stuff we already eat. And again, it's just a win-win situation. I'll stop there as Gail's waving her hands.
Sorry, that was mean of me. I'm not quite sure, Gloria, maybe you can just put slide 2 up now. I mean, what I did ask Des deliberately to talk about the human food of this, but it should be pointed out that in the UK, we are not allowed to use this yet for human food, although it is used in other European countries. And Des is speaking to the Scottish Government at the moment to see if he can get powers to be that changed. But I'm sure we'll talk about that in the Q&A. So there you go. Eating meat. This is what this educated audience think. And I'm glad no one has said never, actually. Nikki, that will be reassuring for you. I was going to ask Mads if you could just very quickly say, as an objective, I can't ask Nikki, Mads, as an objective commentator, what would you say was the most sustainable amount of times? Sorry, I'm still talking. Yeah. How often? Yeah, would you say?
Well, most studies at the moment suggest that if everyone on the planet should have access to sufficient high quality protein, then we in our part of the world should limit ourselves to maybe eating meat, depending on type of meat, but maybe a couple of times a week at most. And that's also where many of the governmental guidelines in mainland Europe are going towards meat twice a week, something like that, which is a big shift if we've been used to eating it 6 or 7 times a week.
You're on mute, Gail.
Thank you. Gloria, can you put poll 3 up now? Because that relates to the talk we just had. I'm sorry, I did put it in the wrong place. Yeah, so would you? And we'll get the answer to that after no, hang on, what's next? No, here we go. It's William Clark next. Yes, so we'll get the answer after. So William is from Zero Waste Scotland, Dr. William Clark. He's the bioeconomy research analyst there, and he provides policy and technical support across the circular food system. And I've asked William if he can sort of fill in the gaps. Obviously, I could have had a dozen speakers. There are a lot of exciting things going on in Scotland. They are all Scottish companies that we're looking at. So I've asked William to tap into the gaps, to plug the gaps that we have got. So William, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gail. Thank you for inviting me along today. It's really nice to speak to you all. My introduction's in the chat there, so I won't take you through it myself. But I mean, what I really wanted to point out today, I'm starting my timer as well, is that, we've heard about community growing and food collection, we've heard about vertical farming, we've heard about regenerative agriculture, sorry, and we've heard about insect farming, all fantastic subjects. But what I want to point out is that in this world of man-made problems, these are all nature's solutions. So my job title is very grand, but what I effectively do is work with nature, identify solutions that nature's been working on for, black soldier fly are around about 60 million years old. So nature's been doing my job for much longer than I have, and it's so much better at it than I am. So I very much celebrate this event today, and look forward to communicating. Slide please, Gloria. Thank you. So I think it's been touched on a couple of times today. We waste more than 1/3 of the food we produce. Putting that in a land use context, that's an area larger than China. It takes around 66 times the area of Scotland to produce all of that food that we waste. It's equivalent to about 1.3 billion tonnes. Its greenhouse gas profile is the 3rd biggest in the world, and that food loss is worth £750 billion. So I would highlight, as we reimagine foods, we need to reimagine food wastes, and what I'm illustrating with the slide here, we need to take a total food approach. So we need to start thinking about all the gases that are produced as we make these foods. We need to think about the solid materials that are generated as a byproduct from it, and we need to think about the liquid nutrients that quite often are put down the sink and add to eutrophication of our oceans. So as an example of this today, I'm going to use distilleries here in Scotland to give you a rural context and a rural business, also a product that we all recognise. Slide, please. So focusing on nature-based solutions, and I'm glad the picture at the start was algae on a plate. I would like to talk to you about microalgae. There's a touch of science fiction in this, so it direct you to the right-hand side. As we talk about microalgae, I want you to think about a tree. This is a robot tree in Mexico, and the algae, which you can see in the top left-hand corner, they're single-cellular organisms, single-cellular plants is the best way to think about them. In this context, they're effectively the leaves on a tree, so they need to use carbon dioxide, the same as a normal plant, to grow. They need solid materials to process as their foods, and they take other nutrients and live in the liquids. So they're almost perfectly designed to work with distilleries. So how do you grow them? You can see on the left-hand side here, this is a microalgae farm. All of the things that we've been talking about today as well are doing much more with much less. So it's reducing the land use, water use, energy use. It's using sunshine to address a number of our problems. So we can take the gaseous outputs, and this is a live project we're working on with Zero Waste at the moment. We can take all of the gases that go up the chimney in a whisky distillery. It's a fermentation process, so the yeasts effectively create CO2 as a byproduct. We can capture that and utilise it. So we can make what is considered a waste with a significant impact. We can turn that into a product. The solid materials, we can do the same in liquid materials. Again, we can feed these microalgae. And the reason I'm so keen on these is linking feeds and foods. We all need omega-3s. It's one of the limiting ingredients in fish farming. It's critical for our health, but also animal health, and it is going to become a limiting product in the near future. The world can only produce so much, so we've only got so much to go around, and we all need it. So by reimagining foods and by reimagining wastes at the same time, we can start to answer these problems. So by growing the algae, we reduce the waste, but nature does my job so much better than I can. So you don't just get the omega-3, you don't just get one product, you get a range of products. So in the centre here, as you can see, thank you very much, Nikki, I was a big fan of your work. In the centre here, you can see you can generate a number of products using those 3 waste streams in a rural environment, create the jobs, address the climate, and you get economic benefits. So you can produce the biomass, and from that, you get food ingredients, you get the dietary supplements, so it improves our health. You get pet supplements, we always forget small animals in this story. You can still take more materials, so you get the supernatant, so from that you can generate more products, you get the bioactive compounds at that stage. So by working with nature, thank you, Gail, we can address all of these problems. We can address foods and the environmental crisis by reimagining food. So thank you very much for listening, and back to Gail. Oh, Gail, you're muted.
Thank you for that quick tour around all those exciting things. I get so excited by all these things. I must say, as I said last week when we were actually in Huntley School, I wish I was a school child now, and I wouldn't be going into architecture. I'd be going into something scientific, definitely. I think it's where it's where the exciting things are happening now. So poll result, yes. Would you? 68 would. Okay. I thought with this enlightened audience it would be even more, but the idea of that wriggly thing on your plate, obviously, it's not attractive. Right. So now we've got our artistic interlude. While we've got some questions up, but this is your chance to put any more questions in the chat box. And this is the second piece, because we had the first one last week by Tom Line, who is a jazz bassist and a composer, and in lockdown he lives down the road from us in Midlothian in Path Head, and in lockdown he went out into the landscape of Midlothian and took recordings, and then went back home and added his own bass music over them and synthesized it to make this wonderful concoction that to me absolutely represents what I'm trying to do in these conversations, which is show that we need to merge the traditional, natural and high tech to get the solution we want. And I think that his piece demonstrates that nicely, or personifies it in music. So if we could have now Of Birds and Bugs by Tom Line. So thank you, Tom Line. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. I was grooving away there because I love his music. And that was actually, oh no, we don't want that video now. I don't know why that's come up. Oh, is that just on my screen?
No, I had it too.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, so now onto the Q&A. And if I could see if all the speakers could put their videos on, please, so that I can see you waving at me frantically if you're going to, yeah, great, thank you. It would help if other people turn their videos off so I can fit all the speakers on. It would be quite good if you could do that, the attendees, please. First question, which sort of relates to my introduction, is this going to cost more, this whole change to a sort of more bio food product system? And if so, how do we make it a just transition? And will the profits be going back into the local communities where these things are happening? So who would like to start answering that? Because we haven't talked about the economics at all of this and the cost of doing it. Yeah, Des.
Okay, I mean, if you're going to feed insects like we do on food waste, then essentially the food waste is free. You produce protein, which you can turn back into food. You produce also a fertilizer, which is very good and is very good for soil improvement, and is organic as well. So essentially you're taking a waste product, which is free, and converting it into food. Therefore, you're making food for free. I'm not going to say any more.
Okay, thank you. Nikki.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah, I think the thing that we need to remember is that we spend something like with a third, globally, the third cheapest food as a proportion of what we spend. And I think it's really important when we're having conversations about the cost of food that we remember that food poverty isn't an issue, poverty is the issue. And that actually we need to not just look at how much does the food cost, but look at the other pressures that are being applied to everybody's back pocket at the moment. So and the externalities of the costs of our food. So where we have cheap food, those externalities are applied in the healthcare system and in issues around housing and wages and transport. And so actually what we really need to think about is how do we directly ensure that the costs, the money that we're paying goes as close to the farmer as it possibly can, so that it's not intercepted by big business who then take huge profits and don't invest in local communities. Hence why I was saying earlier that, where you can, if it's possible to buy locally, even if it's just one thing that you're buying locally, it makes that difference. I'm sure that Mads probably has something that he maybe wants to add to that as well from a policy point of view. I'm not sure.
Mads?
Always, yeah, Graham, you also had your hand up, but
sorry.
I think it is important to see that food poverty is a poverty issue, as Nikki says. We can't solve every problem that's wrong in the UK just from farming or eating differently. But it is also important to say that things can change. I used to live in Denmark. I'm from Denmark, and until fairly recently, 10 years ago, food was as low on the priority list amongst Danes as it seems to be here in Scotland. And we also only used a fraction of our disposable income on food, and that have started to change. So you can, by showing that food can be more enjoyable, more cool, you can actually get people to be excited about food and put a little bit more money towards food and prioritize good food, because good food doesn't have to be expensive food. We can definitely opt for great food, like some of the food, for instance, Nikki is offering a lot of the time. And then you can say, okay, then I have to tune down a little bit on maybe some junk food that I'm caught with and then stick to something else. It's also about learning how to make the most of the food you've got. The problem is many of the people who need to learn this doesn't have the skills and are caught in that junk food cycle where they don't really have any chance. So we need to start quite early to get a lot of people more food literate.
Oh, you're muted again.
Sorry, I'm not very natural at this, am I? I'm just seeing if anyone else got their hand up, but Des is not on my screen at the moment, which means he's on the next one. Graham, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just going, I'll answer the cost point from a vertical farming point of view as well, that at the moment, vertical farm produce is, it's complicated, it depends on the crop, but so the simple answer is generally it's probably comparable to traditional grown crops. I think where the benefit comes in and where you can make really good quality produce for potentially even a better price is when you take into account the amount of food waste when you look at shortening that supply chain. If you put a cost against that food waste, which we absolutely should, then actually, you know, locally grown produce, whichever form, whether that's from vertical farmers or elsewhere, suddenly starts to make a lot more sense. And in terms of keeping profits in the community, there's no reason why all of these new techniques and these new all the things we're talking about today can't be done on a local scale, and that therefore keeps profit in, you know, within Scotland and within existing farming communities and rural communities and so on as well.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. I mean, do you think? Oh, William.
Just to follow on from the points that our speakers made, I think sometimes we tend to think in a quite short-term basis around about foods. You know, 2050 we've got 9.5 billion people, so these price arguments are going to completely change as climate change comes in. You know, Graham's arguments around about energy and these sort of things, it's going to become more difficult to produce food, and these technologies are absolutely necessary. So we need to be working on these right now. Sometimes when the cost benefit analysis doesn't quite translate, but we need these technologies, processes and products in the next 5 to 10 years to really address these problems. So I think we need to take a kind of short-term approach. We need to do things right here, right now about the climate emergency, but we do need to remember we've got other problems coming down the lines that we need to answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, William. Des seems to have disappeared. I don't know what's happened to him, Gloria. If you can.
He's here.
I'm definitely here.
All right, you're not on my screen. Oh, all right.
Just a new screen then.
Well, since I can't. Oh, there you are. Hi, sorry. I just want to make sure you weren't waving somewhere off the screen, and I wasn't. I'd lost you. I think that leads on to whether you think the Scottish government should be subsidising any of these types of farming, or to set up new initiatives, and that relates a bit to one of the questions, which is about public procurement, which I think Anne Packard has asked when and how, who will persuade public procurement, hospitals, prisons, etc., to introduce bugs into their clients' diet. But I think it's more a question about government and public sector leadership, as she goes on to say. So what role do you think government should be playing in all this? Well, Mads, and then William.
Yeah, I would probably advise not to use subsidies necessarily to say, okay, we'll just lower prices of one thing or another thing. That is what have caused the havoc that we are in at the moment, that we have subsidized some foods over other foods, and that have distorted the market mechanisms. I think where government has two places where government has a key role is, first of all, investment. Make sure that we invest in the things that we know are solutions for the future. We can see a government like Denmark, where the Sovereign Wealth Fund have just said, we are only investing in plant protein because we know there's so much investment in animal protein in Denmark at the moment. So we need to rebalance the investment streams towards what they see as the new. So investment is one thing, and then changing consumption patterns, using the public power to change consumption habits so that consumers start being the drivers of change, not subsidies. And that can be done through public procurement, but it can also be done through a lot of maybe more innovative public-private partnerships of the like that some of you might know of, where you can actually get a public-private partnership going around some foods that we see as part of the solution, but doesn't have the market attractiveness yet. So I think that's a better option than subsidies.
Okay, thank you. And did you want to add something, William?
Yes, so sometimes it's subsidies in other areas that are the problem. So as we look to biomass to solve a lot of our problems, if you burn that biomass for energy, you're subsidized. So a lot of the businesses that we're talking about today actually have to compete with a subsidy rather than needing a subsidy. So it might be reduced subsidies in other areas as the policy measure, as much as subsidising any particular technology or business within this area. The point I was going to make was a wee thing. Welsh schools were actually trialling insect protein as part of the school dinners for a while. In the last couple of years, there was a change because of Brexit. There was a change in the way that the regulations were transported from EU to UK. So none of that's working anymore. So there are very good examples of this happening already. It's just not happening at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. There's a question for you, Graham. Is vertical farming a highly mechanized process, or does it provide jobs too? And I think that is always a big question about some of the high-tech ones. Can they be done by robots, or are they going to involve people?
I suppose that's the same as, I mean, you could look at virtually any industry and they would be asking themselves the same question at the moment. In theory, at some point in future, it could be done by robots. At the moment, it's, you know, there's probably a mix. There's a bit of automation in that when our crops are growing, they're generally very hands-off. So we have an operator that sows in a fairly traditional way using a seeding line. They are not interfered with while they're growing, and then they're harvested in a fairly traditional way by somebody, you know, in a similar way to a polytunnel business or so on. So there's a bit more automation, but fundamentally we are creating jobs. And from our point of view, if we're doing that locally in Scotland, in rural parts of Scotland, then that's creating jobs in Scotland that otherwise would be done in other parts of the world.
Yeah, no, fair point. And a question directly for Nikki. George Monbiot, fancy, he's been mentioned again, says that intercropping with animals reduces the output per hectare compared to protein cropping. Is this right?
No, not necessarily. I would say that one of the challenges that we really have is that a lot of more regenerative approaches in farming are not well researched. And so we're only just seeing some of these mixed land use research projects actually taking place. So previous research projects have very much been about modelling. So it's been assumptions that have been made based on what we currently know. However, actually practical assessments of where these practices have been put in place that are able then to take into account the biological functioning is something that we are missing. So whilst I respect the fact that George Monbiot has read 5,000 scientific papers or whatever he's sort of claiming to have done, we have to remember that these are based within an existing paradigm, and that most research is about 7 to 10 years behind the most kind of innovative and forward-thinking farmers, just because of the way that research happens and the length of time and all of that kind of process. So what we are seeing is that farms who are doing this are not seeing a reduction. In fact, they're actually seeing an increase in productivity from the land. And one of the things that he was talking about was in relation to agroforestry, where there were crops that were being shaded, and so therefore the yield was reduced, but he only took into account the yield from the crop. If you take into account the yield from the tree as well, there's a significant increase in the overall productivity per hectare. And we know that that's the case from the work that the Soil Association, Woodland Trust and Wakelands have been doing in England. So I would say that we actually just don't have the data yet, and the
lost her sound.
You've gone. You've gone mute, Nikki.
Oh, sorry. Oh, don't know what's happening there. Sorry. I think we all got muted quick because someone unmuted.
All right.
Yeah, we did a second ago.
We're all back now. We only missed a second. Don't worry. We heard most of what you said. Thank you, Nikki.
Sorry.
No, not at all. Are there any? This is for anybody that wants to come in. Are there any links in the Scottish Government Good Food Nation report? Mind you, have to have read it to be able to answer this one. I doubt anyone's had time to read it from cover to cover yet. To some of the innovative ideas discussed here, it seems like there's a bit of political lobbying to be done. Mads.
Well, as a professor in food policy, I should be the one who at least had read not only the report, but also the piece of legislation that was approved last week. And you could say that it isn't very concrete. It is a framework legislation. So I was very excited 7 years ago, and I had a different job. I looked to Scotland and said, okay, they want a food bill, a good food nation. They have all these great ideas, but there haven't been that much development of the great ideas. There's been a lot of development outside of government, but government haven't made it much more concrete over these 7 years. So now they're handing it over to a lot of other organizations, both public and private, to then put the onus on them to say, where do we see this going? So now it's to Argyll Butte, and it's to Zero Waste Scotland, and it's to Food Standard Scotland to figure out, okay, where do they see this going, and what do they see is the tangible ways forward. So there hasn't been anything taken off the table. There have been put much on the table from the Scottish government yet, which is why we have to have these conversations, because we really, really need to show that there are options out there. So we just don't use the fact that there isn't much vision in the Scottish government as an excuse to then just keep going as we've done all the time, because there are great options. We need to show them, and we need to persuade policymakers that we can actually do better.
Thank you. Well, we did invite our connections in the Scottish Government who have met SEDA Land, and so they've shown an openness to us to come today. None of them have come, but I will send them all a recording of this one. So hopefully they will see it at some point. Do you have more faith in the Food Commission? It's probably too early to say, isn't it? I don't know if you know who's on it, if they've said who's on it, for example. No, okay, fair enough. This interesting question from Chris. What's the role of advertising and marketing in persuading people to make what seem radical food choices? Advertising seems to have been very successful in persuading people to eat junk food. Yeah, nice point there. Yeah, so this is, yeah, how do we win the hearts and minds? How do we take people along with us? Des.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to talk about insect protein to humans, like Gail's already said, we need to change in the law before we can do that. But when you put it into things like pasta, bread, and pizzas and stuff like that, people don't even know it's there. And so you don't need to market it. And then they don't even know it's there. They don't taste it. They just start eating it, and once they've started eating it, they will continue to eat it. So there is marketing to be done, I agree, but there are under the radar ways of getting it into people without them even thinking about it, really. I think that's one of the starting points that we should be aiming for.
Thank you. Rupert, what's your sort of thoughts about things like, high protein insect food? I mean, as someone who's out there collecting the real thing on the ground, do you have a adverse reaction to that, or what?
I mean, I think I've got a house in Thailand. I spent time in Laos. It's quite common out there for people to eat insects as a big part of their diet. They really love them. I remember a bunch of kids in Laos fighting over bamboo worms. Bee larvae, that kind of stuff. It's not really ever been on my radar. I think we in this country probably have a revulsion with bugs and such. But I think it's really exciting. I think I heard about these soldier flies a long time ago, and I in Thailand wanted to set something like that up to feed fish, which would be my angle at it. The bugs themselves don't appeal to me. We're always looking for ways to take things that you wouldn't want to eat and turn them into something delicious. So I think it's definitely an area I would like to explore, but it's never been something that I've picked up on yet.
Okay, thank you. Graham, how do you keep the global food companies out of vertical farming? Family farms, please.
Yeah, so I think in my vision of what vertical farming looks like in future, we're essentially growers. We are a high-tech grower, and I think there's room in the market for family farms to move into the right size of vertical farming in future. I think there's really exciting opportunities on, say the Western Isles, to have a vertical farm that produces all of their produce. So you have issues with CalMac ferries just now not being able to get to parts of the Western Isles. If you can produce really high quality produce from a relatively small Western Isles farm that can supply all of the needs for the restaurants in Ireland and also the people living there as well, I think that size of operation works really well. I think we'll probably end up in a place where there will be larger entities who are supplying supermarkets at high volume, low cost produce. But I think there will still be room in the market for a full range of different size farms as we have just now.
Okay, thank you. And now one for Nikki. I've read a lot of claims that regenerative agriculture is carbon negative. However, I've also read that it's high in nitrogen oxide emissions. Is that right? NOx, nitrogen oxide emissions. Do you have any more info on that?
Yeah, sure. So nitrous oxide generally in agriculture comes from synthetic fertilizer, which shouldn't be as present in regenerative farming sort of systems, or from livestock manure, primarily when it's been stored. So I'm not quite sure where the information that you got that says that there are highest nitrous oxide emissions in regenerative systems, because it doesn't make sense in terms of how the system works. So I would say that that isn't correct. For example, a lot of nitrous oxide emissions come from slurry, so in housed and particularly housed cattle systems, primarily dairy systems, and also in indoor pig systems. There's a lot of poo essentially that is liquid and then needs to be stored, and that then is spread as a fertilizer on fields, which in some way is kind of, you know, nutrient cycling. However, the way that it is stored and the way that it is then applied can create real issues around nitrogen leaching, which means that it's then getting into rivers and we have eutrophication issues. So I would say that more regenerative systems don't have that issue, as they tend to primarily focus on direct deposition of dung and urine. And as long as dung and urine are generally kept apart, which is what happens when an animal naturally passes dung and urine, then there's a reduction in the amount of kind of ammonia and nitrous oxide that's released. So I'm not quite sure where that information would have come from, but my understanding of regenerative systems is that it's not an issue.
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer. Well done. Another question from Carol Egner, which is something which I keep asking, but I'm told it's really too big and too difficult to ask, but I'm going to ask it all the same. Excuse me. If we convince our population to reducing meat intake to twice a week, do we then have the capability in Scotland to feed ourselves if we reallocate land use for food use? I mean, what I would love to get to the bottom of land use in Scotland, of how the land is apportioned. And last week's conversation was very deliberately, we talked about trees and the construction industry. And it would be lovely to have this wonderful formula where we knew how much land in Scotland, and also it depends on the type of land, you know, and looking at all the James Hutton Institute maps about the quality of the soil and the altitude and all these other things, you know, where should we be planting trees for making buildings so we don't have to import wood for our buildings? Where should we be planting our raspberries? Where should we be planting our wheat? You know, and it is a really big question, but you know, it is one that I will ask the panel if anyone would like to sort of try answering that in some way. Well done, Mads, brave man.
You could say Jeff has already been so kind as to say that it is perfectly feasible to feed the whole of Scotland, actually, just from our good agricultural soil. So it is feasible. We just also have to think about that we are actually in an interconnected system with the folks down south of the border. And that's a bigger picture to also make sure, okay, we actually have to should we feed ourselves on these isles, because we're using twice the amount of lands currently for our dietary needs than we possess. So if we are to keep up in the UK with current consumption of everything, we need twice the size of UK. So there we need some new practices and some change in diets. But if we can stick to what was assumed here, meat twice a week and then some good meat, hopefully at least once, one piece of that, we should be perfectly able to feed ourselves from these lands. The challenge comes in that we also know that some of the good agricultural lands globally are being destroyed at the moment due to climate change. So we probably have to take a bigger part of feeding the world than we may have been used to.
Oh, we all got muted again. Gloria? Gloria!
I didn't do anything.
No, we hear you fine, Gail. No problem at all.
Oh, you all went muted for me. How bizarre. Sorry.
No, that's because you turned yourself on.
All right. Okay. There's a question for Toby and Strother, how does vertical farming compare with fish aquaponics combined farms such as, and then there's a link, but hopefully that's enough I've given you there to answer, Gorem.
Yeah, I guess these aquaponic systems involving fish are probably a little bit rarer, probably for good reason, that it's quite difficult to get both right. So I guess for anybody that's not aware, that the theory is that you use fish as part of your water nutrient cycle. So the waste produce from fish then becomes your fertilizer for your crops. So you have a completely closed loop system. We have a fairly closed loop system already in that we use harvested rainwater. We add a small amount of nutrient to it. In that system, it just means that fish are doing that for you. So it's a really interesting development. I know of companies in London that have tried it and failed because it's just too complicated to get too many parts of the jigsaw right. But it's really interesting if people could get it right. We've got enough challenges to deal with at the moment, so it's not an area that we've looked in. But I wonder if William's come across anybody playing in that sphere at all.
There was 2 businesses actually. So there was one was doing tropical prawns just outside Balfron, alongside a couple of sea vegetables, and then there was another outside Cooper. Who was true aquaponics, so plants plus trout plus. It was quite interesting importing the thinking to Scotland, because it's easier to keep fish like tilapia that we don't see here in Scotland at all, or we see much smaller proportions. So it's very interesting to watch it develop alongside vertical farming, but I think you guys are potentially better placed to move forward quicker in the short term.
Thank you. Rupert, how do you think we can encourage more people to go out and forage and make what they've got of the land around them? Do you have any sort of suggestions for how we can do that?
I mean, I think apart from anything else, just let people know how tasty it is. I think in lockdown we did a great thing about the rose hips. We wanted to encourage people to get together in their family groups and go out and pick rose hips to. It's one of the things I remember as a kid. It's something I remember spurring me on, but it's really, really tasty and tropical, and hardly anyone knows that you can eat them. When the older generation were passing it on to the younger generation, and people were coming through the door, and they were really enlivened. They said, "We've never had anything like this. This is a great experience." It was a sort of revolutionary moment for a lot of people. And then to think that they can take that away and make something really tasty, I think it blows most people away. It's healthful, it's inexpensive, it really helps people connect. And I think, I'd say like sort of spiritually fills people, if you like, in a world where people are kind of looking for meaning. So you've got to get them out there. There's lots of great teachers. We like to inspire people by feeding them really tasty things. I think, once you realize it's fun and it's tasty, then what's not to like,
Yeah, I mean, one of the polls that I took out, because I had far too many, was do you think home economics should be compulsory in primary and secondary schools? And that is food science and making food. I mean, I imagine, can you all just raise your hand? I mean, I imagine you'll all say yes if you think it should be compulsory. Yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, I just find it extraordinary it's not. My children have come to school and they can't scramble an egg, despite my trying. So there was a question from Donald McPhillamy. If we rewild large parts of the uplands, then game becomes more of a possibility. I guess this will always be a bit niche. Do you agree, Mads?
It might be niche, but I think what I hope to say from my introduction is that we need a lot more niche, and we need to support a great variety of niches, because we need a more diversified food system. I don't think that Rupert or any forager will be able to feed us. I don't think necessarily that grain will feed us all, but we need a lot of niches to develop, and definitely game can be a great way of feeding, adding something to our diets as well. It's just important that it is not. It have to not compromise with the other ecosystem services from increasing forestry. I know that's a challenge for some areas, and game as such. If you're farming game, if you have a farm only of deer, it's not very sustainable from a climate perspective, unfortunately. So it has to be wild.
Thank you. And Nikki, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just to say, I did put in the chat that actually I think there's already, we don't need to rewild the uplands to deal with game. We've got more than enough deer that we need to address already. It's not necessarily hand in hand with rewilding. And actually it's the supply chain that's the issue. There's a really nice example in the Cairngorms that Cairngorms Connect are connecting together butchers and estates, and then getting venison out primarily as sausages and burgers, so it's a little bit more accessible and it's also a bit cheaper. So there are some really nice examples already happening. We just need to see that scaled out, and the infrastructure, so the butchers to be able to be provided to support that. So that's the biggest issue, is around the supply chain, not the number of deer. There's plenty.
Yeah, and another issue sort of seems a bit tangential, but it's accommodation, because you're mentioning game. When I ordered during lockdown some fish from the Ethical Shellfish Company on Mull, they did a sort of cooperative, and we could get cheese from Mull and venison from Mull. And we ordered all those during lockdown. It's fantastic. But I had an email not long ago saying that the Ethical Shellfish Company has now closed. It's gone bust due to, and it did list all the reasons, but one of them was lack of affordable housing for the staff. And that really shocked me. I mean, I know it's an issue, but to have a real example put to me like that was, I found very shocking. Right. Where are we at? Sorry. Game is already, this is from Gloria, game is already possible, and we need to eat more venison as they are damaging wild and biodiversity, are they not? All right. So what's the view on whether they should be eaten more? Rupert.
Yeah, I mean, I think I grew up in the Highlands. My father was a stalker for a while. We ate lots of venison, and I think a lot of the states have probably what I would say too many deer. You know, we had the Industrial Revolution, and we had the clearances. A lot of the trees were cut down, and I've just been in the Highlands again recently in a sort of regenerative croft project in Rossshire, and the trees just don't get a look in. They've put fencing up. All the deer need is one evening to get in, and in 20 years these fields are still empty. And the crazy thing is, you know, we're shipping our wild venison largely off to Germany, and importing farmed venison from New Zealand, which is the stuff you find. And I think it's one of the best things going. You know, we always used to serve it at dinner, raw, cooked. I mean, it's just a delight, and I don't understand why we don't, you know, we could have more trees by eating more venison, I think, you know.
Des, would you like to say a bit more about the problems with using your insect protein in the UK? Because you've explained it to me, but I think the audience might be interested to know what the issues are.
Yeah, I mean, when we had Brexit, the Food Standards Agency essentially then made insects and insect protein illegal, so you could not sell it or buy it in the UK. And that is still the case, although they did say that anyone who was already selling it, they wouldn't inspect them and they wouldn't fine them for doing it, which seems a little bit strange. So you've now got to apply to get your insects registered, which is costing a lot of money, and essentially it's just following the European Food Standards Agency. So you cannot do it legally. So it's a real funny, strange thing. The other thing is, even if you feed it to animals at the moment, you can feed the live larvae to chickens, to trout, to pigs, to salmon. But as soon as you kill them, make them into a protein powder, you now cannot feed that powder to those chickens or the fish or whatever. So the law is very, very strange, because you can feed the live insects, but if you crush them up and make them into a powder, you can't. The EU have already said that you can, and they changed the law about 6 or 8 weeks ago, and apparently we're going to copy and paste that rule so that you can feed it to animals. But that will take us, well, who knows with this government. And the Scottish government can't do it because it's a UK law, so it has to be the London government.
Thank you, Des. And I mean, do you see the insect protein, it's always going to be just absorbed into other foods, sort of hidden, so to speak, or do you ever see that it actually might become a primary ingredient?
I think it will eventually, but you know, I think we've got to start small and think sensible. If we try and put insects, you know, into the supermarkets, no one's going to buy them, so that's not going to happen. You know, we've got to start people off. I mean, like Rupert's already said, I mean, in places like Thailand, Laos, in that Southeast Asia area, they're considered a delicacy. Everybody eats them all the time, you know, and there's no reason we don't. It's just that Western Europe has gone off them, and I think the UK has gone very much extreme in that insects are nasty things and insects are a pest. They're not things to be eaten, whereas most of the other world, you know, most of the other parts of the world do. And let's be honest, we've been eating insects for what, 50, 60,000 years? I think we will come back to it, but I think we've got to start slowly, sensibly, and just surreptitiously put it into high protein shakes and, you know, pasta and things like that. Then people won't notice.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And I think we're going to, it'd be a last one now. This is a very direct one for Graham. Just by comparison, is more kit required to do, oh no, sorry, it's not just Graham, it's not just vertical farming, it's the whole lot. By comparison, is more kit required to do algae, vertical or insect farming than the way we farm now on more land? So that could be for any of you, Des, Graham.
Yeah, I'll go first if you want. Essentially, the answer is no. We can farm more insects with the equipment that's already there. People have adapted mushroom farming equipment, and instead of farming mushrooms, you farm insects. And you can use a lot less space and more efficiently, and you just get more protein per square meter. Yeah, the equipment is not a problem. It's just, you know, capital expense, which you have to put in at the beginning.
Would William or Graham like to add to it? Graham?
The same absolutely mirrors in vertical farming, that yes, you have capital expense to set up and you have more equipment to set up, but then your equipment per kilogram of crop produced will be significantly less. So in one 9-meter tower, for example, we produce 10 tons per annum, and that has a footprint of about 50 square meters. So you know, you're getting significantly more veg for your equipment. Another thing to bear in mind is that your inputs are significantly lower, where, as I said earlier, in most vertical farming systems, you would have no pesticides and you would have little to no fertilizer as well, which is very different from field-based systems.
Okay, thank you. And I was just going to throw one last one at everyone, and that is outside, which actually came from Mads this morning, outside your area of food production. What's the one thing that you would like to do to make food production more sustainable in Scotland? And I'd like everyone to throw in their tuppenny's worth, please. So on my screen, first person is Graham.
I think having not quite production, I'll not quite answer the question, but the main thing we could do to improve sustainability, we would have joined up thinking on supply chains, so that we're moving food around more efficiently, which then reduces waste and reduces the carbon footprint of that travel. Interestingly
enough, there's somebody set up a company to do that with wood, so that, you know, because they're all the bits of wood that aren't used, and they're setting up a website to link the sawmill, the producers, the foresters, so that they know what's available and who can use it. So maybe it's something similar for food. Mads, you're next on my screen.
Well, I don't have an area, but what I would like to see would be a coherent understanding amongst the food system stakeholders that something needs to change, and that we have a plethora of paths to follow, but we need to accept that status quo is not an option and that we need to change. And that's what I'm here to try to do.
Thank you. And William?
I think for me, a national food policy that recognises regional context. So, you know, each bioeconomy, each region in Scotland has a very particular accent. And I think unless we can understand those particular accents, it's very difficult to add value to the material. So at the same time, there's a lot of interference across policies specific to food. So things like land use becomes a problem because energy, transport, fuels, fibres, food, you know, all these people are looking to use the same thing. So we really need to concentrate on food and get the rest of the kind of context right at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. And going along, Rupert, you're next on my screen.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'd love everybody to get a bit more involved. You know, if you have a garden, make a forest food garden in the front garden. I think it's by getting involved at the very grassroots that people see the differences that need to be made. You know, if you're exporting all your food needs to everybody else, you're never really getting involved enough to make a difference, I think. And it makes the world a more beautiful place.
Thank you. And lastly, Desmond, because Nikki had to leave to go and see to her cows. So Desmond.
Yeah, for what I'd like to see is instead of everybody putting their food waste in a little food bin and sticking it out for the council and getting the council to come and collect their grass clippings and their clippings off their trees and their flowers, everybody has some black soldier fly in their back garden where they put their own food waste, they put their own grass clippings. If it's not your own garden, get together with the street and do it as a street thing. And you end up A, growing some insects, B, stopping all of this going to landfill, and thirdly, you actually get something decent at the end, which you can either eat yourselves or give to a farmer and give them to his chickens and take some eggs in exchange, take a piece of beef in exchange, you know, and you can do that locally with your own house or with your street or with your group area or whatever. It would just be lovely.
Oh, great. So at the next Jubilee celebration, it's not going to be a street party, it's going to be a waste party, isn't it? I can see it coming. Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. And now we have two very short poems, very short indeed, because we ran a competition at the Gordon Schools in Huntly for poetry on food, and we've got two entries. And while Gloria's putting one of them up, just to say that there were a real range of poems, from celebration of food to the family gathering to people with hunger. So here's the first one, and this is, oh, I think she's going to introduce herself. So if you could play that, please, Gloria.
My name is Lillian Gout, and I'm a new S2 at the Gordon Schools. And my poem is called Summer Berries. Blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, and more. Blackberries, gooseberries, and cherries galore. Joyful, juicy jams, lots of berries in my hands. You can mish and mash them, and mix and match them. Tasty summer fruits growing from their summer roots. Nothing can compete with a juicy berry treat.
Thank you. And then the second one is a little more it's sad, and it's about people who don't have food. So next one, please, Gloria.
I got that in the end.
Okay, that's fine. It's a beautiful little poem about a food bank bag, but I'm not going to read that to you. But anyway, they were the two prize winners. I'm not going to do the last poll, Gloria, because I think that's been addressed in the Q&A. So now to end off, well, first of all, it's a big thank you to all the speakers. And that is to Graham, to Mads, to William, to Rupert, to Des, and to Nikki that's already left us. Thank you very much to Chris for reading his poem, to Tom Line. The host has asked you to start. Oh God, my video. Sorry about this. Sorry about that, folks. I'm here now. And thank you to Tom for the sonable, as he calls his wanderings through the landscape, to the Open University for sponsoring the poem, and to the back of house team. That's Gloria managing this, Ian, Christina, and Rosanna. And now, Gloria, if you could put the last slide up, please. So we would encourage you to join SEDA to support ecological design in Scotland, to support SEDA Land. We're looking for volunteers. Oh, start your video. Start my video?
I can see you.
Oh, you can see me.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had another sign up saying you want to see me again. I think one of me is enough. And yes, we're looking for volunteers. We've got a lot of experts. Mads and Nikki are both already on our steering group. We have some fantastic people and we have volunteers, but we're always looking for more help if anyone would like to join. This talk, the previous talk, are being put onto a new page on the SEDA Land website. SEDA Land website is within the SEDA website, and it's going to be about bioproducts. It's going to have information, case studies. It's only just been set up. There's not a lot on it at the moment, but we're hoping that it will expand and be updated as time goes on. So do have a look at that, because there is going to be, I think it will be the sort of first port of call really for the public on bioproducts. I think that's all from me now. We're actually ending early, which sorry, I thought that well, we missed a poem, didn't we? So that's why we're slightly early. But that's great. Everyone can go and get the last of the evening sunshine, which I'm sure, you know, I'm delighted. Thank you for coming here on the first beautiful day. I really appreciate that. And yeah, back to the hopefully we'll all be eating algae on a plate very soon. So thank you everyone very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Well done.
If your team, the speakers stay on just until everyone's gone, please.
You want the speakers to stay?
Debrief.
Hi, Gail, I'm off now. Do you need me? Or
No, I don't need you. I mean, we can still start. I think most it's down to, there aren't many people left. No, but thanks, Chris. That was great. Unfortunately, one person didn't seem to get the satire in your poem, but I thought it
wasn't really satire. It was entertainingly dreadful positivity. That's what I was aiming for.
You're right. And it complemented Sophie's poem beautifully. So thank you very much.
Can I butt in? Chris, can we find that anywhere else? I really enjoyed that. Can we read it somewhere?
I sent Gail a copy. Maybe you could put a copy up, Gail?
On the resource page, I should have said this, on the resource page, both poems